I actually don't think, as stated, this theory of unity will succeed. So this is really an extended footnote. I think there are various problems with it. I wanted to mention it simply because it's such a widespread theory of unity that I think it needs to be remarked on. Now, the reason why I chose a Coke can is it's actually a case that presents a particular kind of problem for this theory. Now, it presents a problem because a Coke can has a lot of visible detail. There's white over here. There's red over here. Now, both the red and the white are bound to the cylinder. In addition, the Coke can is sitting on a surface. And there's some sense in which the Coke can is seen as bound to this surface. It's not just free floating in space or existing nowhere. It's located on a particular object, the surface of this table. Now, just focusing for a minute on the red and the white. So we have three things to unify: red, white, and cylinder. And suppose the temporal binding theory is right. That means that, say, the cells that are responsive to white are firing at some rate of oscillation, say 23 hertz. Now, the cells that are firing to red have got to be firing at a particular rate too. What rate are they firing at? Well, whatever rate they're firing at, it has to be the same rate as the rate of the cylinder cells, because the red is experienced as on the cylinder. But the white is experienced as on the cylinder too. So if the white is bound to the cylinder, then white fires at 23 hertz, the cylinder fires at 23 hertz. But if the red is bound to the cylinder, then the red is firing at 23 hertz. All three of these things are bound. But if we experience as unified everything that fires at 23 hertz, then it's not clear why we don't experience white throughout the cylinder, and simultaneously, paradoxically, red throughout the cylinder. Or if the can is bound to the table, are the cells for the table firing at the same rate as the cells for the can? In which case, why don't we experience this as just a giant table or just a giant can? The problem is the temporal coding strategy would actually require a different temporal code for each little pixel of this picture. That's possible, but it's a much more complicated story. And it's a story whose complexity actually leads to certain worries about illusory conjunctions that would arise in a very noisy nervous system when you have to have a specific temporal code for each little pixel. We have no evidence that there's that degree of temporal specificity of coding, nor from an engineering perspective, any reason to believe that the nervous system could handle this degree of coding complexity. Now, there's actually evidence that the brain couldn't be doing this. And the evidence comes from a variety of studies. Here's one. This is from Victor Lamé. Look at this particular pattern here, and you'll notice you see it as one object, a square, sitting on another object, the background. The pattern that exists in this square is unified. You see it as a single object, and it's separate from the pattern you see in the background. But if you measure cellular activity in the brain, you can find that there's synchrony between cells that are looking at this picture. Interestingly, for the temporal binding theory, there's perfect synchrony between a cell here and a cell here, just as the binding theory would predict. So it does look like within the square, cells are firing at the same rate. But it turns out that cells outside of the square are firing at that exact rate too, suggesting that firing in synchrony is not a matter of binding things together. It's not what creates binding. It's something else. You'll find all cells for a current experience synchronized together. And I think the best explanation of what synchrony is doing is synchrony is allowing communication in the nervous system. It's allowing information to propagate forward, to get from perception to subsequent processing areas that allow for further mental processing, like encoding and memory. Now, if that's the view, then the temporal binding theory can't succeed. We need another one. Here's, I think, a better one. I think there's good reason to believe, which I won't survey here, that binding is actually achieved by certain kinds of mental maps. And the maps, which bind things together, come in two forms. There are maps of spaces. So you just have a spatially arrayed population of cells that give you the basic configuration of the visual field or some other sensory field. And each location in the map is then causally linked to some representation of specific features like color or shape. and a color and shape are experienced as belonging to the same object if they're linked causally to the same location on the spatial map. There are also object maps, so you might have a representation of the structure of an object, and that representation might be linked to color representations that help you experience the particular parts of that object as having the colors that they do. And this story fits well with all kinds of things we know about errors of binding. So for example, we know that when high-level visual areas, which are the best candidate for the location of these maps, are damaged, people have very difficult times experiencing the visual world as unified. They can accurately draw the scene around them, but they don't see the little lines in their own drawing, much less the visual world, as connected. Each little edge is separate for them because they don't have these high-level maps. We also know that there are conditions under which you get illusory conjunction. So if you present a red square and a blue circle very quickly, people might experience a blue circle and a red square. Or they might just experience blueness and redness, circularness and squareness, without having any sense of them belonging together. And it's probably because you haven't achieved the level at which there are these high-level maps to bring the different components of the percept together. Now, an important thing to notice about these pathological cases is that when unity fails, we don't lose a sense of I-ness. If there is any sense of I-ness at all, it doesn't look like failures of binding lead to a radical disintegration of the self, as the sort of neo-Kantian theory might predict. And the other important thing to notice is you don't need a sense of I-ness in order to have one of these spatial maps. So the idea that I-ness is involved in unity, if this is the best theory of unity, is not supported by the contemporary empirical evidence. Kant talks about unity in space, but also unity in time. How do you explain unity in time? Just briefly on this, one of the things people have looked at who've been interested in how temporal moments get unified together are things like the beta phenomenon. Also, sometimes there's something called the phi phenomenon and something called the beta phenomenon. Most of what people talk about under the name phi phenomenon really is the beta phenomenon. I won't go into the details. But the basic phenomenon looks like this. So if you see an object like this blue circle, followed by another object like this blue circle, in fast succession, you might experience it as one object moving backwards and forwards. We unify these two separate objects into a single object over time. We see it as one object in motion. Now, what's striking about the phi phenomenon and the beta phenomenon is we seem to fill in the gap between one circle and the other. So I don't have any intervening circles. I have this one, and then there's this one. But because they occur in fast succession, it seems like a fluid movement from one location to another, suggesting that the mind is interposing another sequence of circles, or a sequence of circles between the first presentation and the second presentation. But to interpose a sequence of circles between the first presentation and the second presentation requires the brain knowing where the second circle is going to end up. It needs to fill in the gap before the second circle actually appears. Now that's actually impossible. The brain can't predict where the second circle is going to appear. And because of that, the only explanation of the beta phenomenon available is that conscious experience of time occurs after the actual event has taken place. And this has introduced the idea of a specious present. What we experience as time is not the actual objective time in the world. It's the brain recreating the sequence of events that happened a few milliseconds ago. So unconsciously, we perceive two circles. And then in consciousness, we generate an image of one circle transforming into another that doesn't correspond to the current event, but it corresponds to a reconstruction of the past. Now, how is this being done? I think what must be going on is there's some sort of integration of memory traces. We've stored records of these two circles, and now we're interposing an image of the circles that would exist in between. It's important to notice that consciousness is not like a series of stills. Conscious experience is always in motion. If you have an experience of my hand, it's not a series of still hands. A single conscious moment has temporal breadth. A conscious moment is a moment of an event taking place in time. So I think what's going on is conscious experiences are kind of the level of whole moments that involve some sort of reconstruction of the past, what's being called by David Eagleman and others in contemporary science of time, post-diction. Unlike prediction, where we predict the future, the brain is doing post-diction. It's